Hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Maya Krishnaratne, and I'm a lawyer at the law firm Devry Smith Frank, or DSF. DSF is a full-service law firm located here in the Toronto neighborhood Don Mills, with offices also in Whitby and Barrie. When I say DSF is a full-service law firm, DSF truly is a firm that offers a very comprehensive range of services to our clients. That includes everything from corporate law to commercial litigation to employment law and immigration law, among many other practice areas. I'm a partner in our civil litigation and immigration law groups, and very recently had the fortunate opportunity of sponsoring through DSF and sitting on a panel hosted by the Canadian Italian Business and Professional Association, or CIBA, wherein they were featuring Canada's very own Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Marco Mendicino. I was very fortunate to be able to conduct an interview of the minister as he commented and talked about Canada's policies from an immigration perspective as to what we're doing and what we plan to do over the coming months and years from an immigration perspective to address various things relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. That included everything from how we're going to deal with the entry of foreign nationals to Canada for work and permanent residence purposes, among other things, as well as our quarantine restrictions, and very importantly, Canada's policies from an immigration perspective in terms of how they're going to help address Canada's economic recovery and some of the damage sustained throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. This interview took place on November 10th, 2020, and I'm very excited to share with you the video of that interview. Enjoy.
Look, this has been a year like no other. And suffice to say that when I was sworn in a little less than a year ago, it will be a year on November 20th, I knew coming into the portfolio of immigration, refugees, and citizenship that this was a significant portfolio, one that would have a great meaning, but no one could have predicted COVID-19 and the impact that it has had on not only government, but I'm sure in your businesses and in every facet of life. And I think each and every one of us looking back over the course of the last several months has found ways to overcome the challenges of social distancing and being apart. And certainly we are finding new ways to stay connected, like tonight. And that is true in government as well. We are adapting and we are evolving and we are leveraging technology. And I'm going to come to that in the Q&A session. But I will say that right from the earliest days of when COVID-19 hit, my department at Immigration was directly implicated in taking some decisions, some tough but necessary decisions at the border. As you may recall, we introduced some of the broadest, most sweeping travel restrictions in the history of the country and around the world as a way of trying to limit the movement of people across international borders and to reduce the risk of the spread of COVID-19. But notwithstanding those restrictions, immigration has still proven to be a lifeline to our economy, and not just to our economy by bringing people in to do those jobs which are traditionally hard to fill within the Canadian domestic workforce, but they are delivering for Canadians. And by that, I mean, we're getting the additional support from temporary workers through in the healthcare sector. We are ensuring that Canadians get access to safe and affordable food with our temporary workers. We are increasingly seeing temporary workers contribute their skills and their trades when it comes to building and development. And I hear from leaders within our own community and frankly, right across the continuum, that we need to leverage immigration so that we can continue to build and to expand and to grow. And that really is the chart that I have coursed out forward. I see that our future is very much going to be driven by immigration. And the reason I say that is because history is replete with lessons that when we grow our population, we grow our economy and we grow as a country. And this plan that I just tabled about a week and a half ago is very much focused on jobs creation. It's very much focused on growth. It's focused on our economic recovery. And the way that plan is going to achieve those goals is by looking at our needs today and ensuring that we fill those gaps, those labor shortages, with not only the conventional new immigration, which we hope to bring in a safe and orderly fashion over the border when we can, but I think we've got a very rare and special opportunity right now to take a look at the domestic temporary immigration that is already here inside of Canada within our borders. These are our neighbors, our coworkers, our peers, people who are already putting their shoulder to the wheel and who are stepping up to fill those gaps in the healthcare sector, in the trades, and increasingly building the economy of tomorrow in the tech and innovation sector. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about some of those pathways. So I am very, very excited about the opportunity to contribute not only to the dialogue and the discourse about immigration, but to actually contribute immigration as a means of growing our country. And you know, it's not just about today. The other thing I'll say is this is also about addressing the long-term demographic challenges that we as a country face with a rapidly aging and retiring population. And, you know, I feel very blessed. You know, I've got parents who are still active and engaged, and touch wood, they will be for a very long time. But they have already contributed over 45 years of their lives to making it better for me and for my siblings and for our family. And I'm sure that that is something that many of your members, John, will relate to. To protect the covenants and the way of Canadian life, we need to replenish our workforce through immigration. We just do not have the birth rates in Canada that are necessary to grow that population. So this is as much about addressing those long-term demographic challenges as it is about meeting the urgent needs of today so that we can accelerate our economic recovery. And again, this is very much what our plan is focused on. So I'll just close by saying that we have definitely endured a very challenging year. And I want to say that in many, many respects, we're not out of the woods yet. We're in the midst of a second wave. Those numbers are climbing. That does worry me. And I think we really have to go back to some of the basics when it comes to distancing and washing hands and using PPE and wearing masks when we're out in public as much as possible. There is some good news on the horizon. Yesterday, many of your members will have seen the news that Pfizer has announced that it has a vaccine that could be up to 90% effective. That's fantastic. And it'll further, I think, please you and assure you to know, John, as well as your members, that Canada has already secured millions of doses of that vaccine. So our goal is to get that vaccine as quickly as we possibly can, to distribute it so that we can start to get back to life that's something that resembles normal. But in the meantime, we do have to double down and really go back to the discipline that we showed in the spring, which allowed us to get that curve flattened. And I'm confident that we will be able to do that again, because being in Parliament and being in public life, I get to meet a lot of people and I get to know them. And one thing that is true, the Canadian spirit is very resilient. We look out for one another. We care for one another. We show a common decency. And that is one of the things that makes me so proud, not only as a Canadian, but with my heritage, as a broader member of the Italian Canadian community. And I see it in communities right across our very diverse society, which I'm extremely proud of. So this is going to be a great conversation. And thank you again, John, for having me on. Grazie.
Well, thank you very much. And Maya, if you want to pipe in on this.
Yeah, good evening, Minister. It's a pleasure to meet with you again. This evening's discussion is obviously taking place at a very unique time. We're 9 months into a pandemic that's had, a significant impact in the economy, which in large part has been a result of the significant impact on travel to Canada, either for work, study, visits, and permanent residence. And we're now just days after a significant US election, the results of which, I expect to start seeing impacts on Canada's immigration numbers, which I think we'll get into throughout the course of the evening. But I think it's safe to say that when you stepped into this role, like just less than a year ago, you weren't quite sure what you were getting into. But I, commend you on your ability to navigate this crazy world you've been thrown into, and you know, we're all happy to have you here today to talk about some of what you've seen and what you have plans for. I think tonight provides us with a great opportunity for you to comment on how immigration will continue to be one of those keys to Canada's economic recovery. And I say continue to be because, you know, under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government, we've seen the implementation and innovation of several pro-immigration policies over the last several years as a means of driving economic growth in Canada. This evening, we'd love to hear from you in more detail, and you've touched on some of the major points in your opening as we move through the next stages of the pandemic and into the new year. I think before we get started, though, it's useful to set the stage for tonight's questions and look broadly at what immigration means. You know, a lot of us tuning in tonight are not constantly thinking about immigration, you know, work permits and study permits and permanent residence. So, you know, just to set the stage, when we talk about immigration, we mean on one hand, temporary entries like coming into work, fill labor shortages and gaps, study permits to international students and tourism. On the other hand, immigration encompasses permanent residence, that pathway to citizenship. And that in itself encompasses a whole lot of things like our rich economic permanent residence programs for skilled workers and family sponsorships. You know, I will focus most of our questions on the economic piece, but we'll tie things together at the end with a few questions on that family unity, family reunification part of our, you know, foundation of our immigration policies. But Minister, maybe to kick off the discussion, you've touched on most of these things, you know, but that concept of immigration as a key economic driver and permanent residence in particular, you've touched on low birth rates, retiring population. Perhaps you can comment a little bit more on how we rely on outside talent or global talent to fill, not take away jobs from Canadians, but where they fill gaps and how that's played out in the last few years and where you may see that going generally when we're not talking about COVID, but you know, where that fits into our immigration policy generally.
Yeah, great way to set the stage for what's going to be a fascinating discussion, I hope. And I'm going to come to some of the innovative pathways that we've created to meet the temporary needs of some of the most important sectors in our economy around innovation technology very shortly. But let's take a step back and just pause to underline why it is that immigration has been such an essential role player in our economy. This country is built on immigration. From our earliest days, we have always looked abroad to attract the best and the brightest to help us populate this wonderful, expansive country that we have. I mean, it's still amazing to reflect for a moment that the vast majority of our population is really quite concentrated and exists, you know, within that lower layer of our border. But the key point here is that through immigration, we are driving growth. We are, and with a greater population size, we are able to see new economies emerge, both locally and regionally. And through those local economies, you get consumption, you get trade, you get commerce, you get development. And that is how you make the wheels of an economy turn. So, I mean, these are basic concepts, but we can't just gloss over them, because we know that in this day and age that there are those who still think, regrettably, and deploy the negative stereotypes that immigrants are here to take your job. They're actually not. They're here to create jobs. And I think the proof is in the pudding. When you look at the statistics, 1 in 3 business owners is an immigrant. In turn, they employ over 250,000 Canadians. There are over 600,000 self-employed immigrants who have their own businesses. All of this is a net contributor to our growth. And so by extension, we should continue to look at immigration as a way of continuing to grow. In addition to that, there are some parts of our economy that are very, very difficult to recruit for. And, you know, I touched on them in my remarks. It includes the healthcare sector, where we need reinforcements. It also includes some other areas like the building and the trades. But in addition to the permanent pathways that we've created, we've also listened very carefully to businesses in the innovation and tech sectors, and they've asked us to create some of the faster routes to come to Canada, and that includes the global skills strategy as well as the global talent stream. And in the simplest of terms, what these two programs do is they provide a rapid pathway for people who are highly skilled and who have a job offer from a well-established business in Canada, and we can turn around that paper, those visas, in normal times at least, very quickly, and see them come in and hit the ground running. The global skills strategy has been around now for a number of years. We have seen over 40,000 high-skilled workers, largely in the tech and innovation sector, but in some other sectors as well, including in engineering and research and development, and they are here. So the dialogue, the conversation that I want to have with you, Maya, and with others is this not now the time to invite those highly skilled workers who are here on a temporary status to stay, to become Canadian? Because by doing so, I think we'll accelerate our recovery and also address the long-term challenges. And I think that's a big part of what we're going to be advancing in our plan going forward.
Thank you. And I will touch on some of those categories that you've mentioned in a few of my later questions. But moving to, the fact that the pandemic has been a major impediment to international travel and has therefore had a drastic impact on industries that thrive on tourism. Travel restrictions have placed an effective travel ban on anything that's considered a recreational or for fun, that so-called non-essential travel concept. What kind of travel have we continued to allow over the last few months, and why? And maybe touch on, the work permit exemptions you created and the student exemptions that have been created and carved out from the travel ban.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the exemptions, but first let me come back to why it is that we put in place the travel restrictions and why we still need them. I mean, make no mistake, this was a very significant, important decision. I don't think in the history of our country have we ever taken such drastic measures to restrict travel to Canada. And certainly it runs contrary to our reputation as being a country that is open and inclusive. And I will say that, the decision to impose travel restrictions at the border was one that was informed by the best advice that we got from our public healthcare experts. It was one that was taken in close collaboration with our provincial and territorial partners. And as well, one that we, consulted and negotiated extensively with our neighbors south of the border, with whom we share the longest unguarded border in the world. And so the non-essential travel ban, which we have negotiated with the United States, which remains in place, which gets rolled over, essentially stops all but the most essential travel. Now, over time, we have introduced new pathways to reunite families, to allow people to come to Canada for compassionate reasons, in urgent circumstances. And yes, we've also, as you mentioned, Maya, revived a pathway for international students to come back to Canada to take an education here. I'm going to unpack a little all three of those categories. Look, family reunification is so important to me, as it is to, I'm sure, you and many of your members. It is precisely because it is a difficult time that we want to see loved ones be able to be together, to get over it. So we initially introduced a family exemption for immediate family members, and then at the beginning of October, we broadened the definition to allow for parents and non-dependent children and siblings. And by doing that, we were able to create a pathway that was incremental and thoughtful and responsible. The same holds true for those who are seeking to come to Canada in urgent circumstances for compassionate reasons. So people who are looking to come to Canada to be with their loved ones at the end of life, or for a funeral, or to help take care of somebody who is chronically ill. um, our colleagues at Health Canada are primarily responsible for administering that exemption, and they work very closely with the provincial and municipal public health care authorities to ensure that where there's a request from the usual 14-day mandatory isolation period, that it's done extremely, extremely carefully. And then finally, with regards to international students, we collaborated intensively with all of the provinces, as well as the schools themselves. Here we're talking about universities and colleges. I will tell you, for those that don't know, the International Student Program contributes over $21 billion every year to our economy. I'll say that again, $21 billion. It is our fourth largest export. And we understand that in this era, that it is imperative that we are innovative. And so for the first 7-8 months of the pandemic, we didn't have any international students coming in unless they'd had a visa that was issued before March, before we had to impose the travel restrictions. But what we did was we created opportunities to allow them to start or continue their studies online, and that helped. But now we're in a position where we have a pathway. In order for the international student to be eligible to come to Canada, they need a number of things. First, they have to be attending a school that has been pre-approved by the province as a designated learning institution with the COVID-ready plan. And B, they need those plans in place when they get to the border. They've got to be pre-screened, they've got to be asymptomatic, and they have to have a quarantine plan the moment that they set foot onto Canadian soil. So a lot of rigor, a lot of due diligence, and together, when you look at this package, it shows that we can continue with safe and orderly immigration. And that is over and above the temporary worker program, where we need people to come to Canada to help meet our food security needs. So that's a high-level overview of how we're keeping immigration going and how we've created some exemptions in the meantime.
And you've touched on some of the most important points. I mean, as someone practicing in the field, we're grateful for those exemptions that have been carved out, which, while allowing people to come in, under certain circumstances, still account for the public health concerns to the best of our ability. Another category of exemptions relates to workers, and that's something you might expand upon in my next question. But despite some of these travel exemptions that we've carved out, there's been an undeniable toll on the Canadian economy. Some businesses that rely on foreign workers to come in, whether it be the laborer in the agricultural sector or the highly specialized skilled person in the tech industry, we've seen a reduction in people coming in, and it's partly because of unavailability of flight options or reduced willingness to travel in these times. But something I can speak to in my practice that we've seen is, the slower processing of applications overall, including that wonderful GTS program you've talked about, the Global Talent Stream, which in normal times has had, wildly quick processing times for good reason. We're seeing everything across the board processing slower, and in turn that has created some backup or backlog for employers seeking to fill in some cases really crucial positions. So can you speak to what your department has been doing and is doing to try to address some of that slowing down of the processing?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And as I said at the outset, there's no doubt that COVID-19 has significantly disrupted our business. And I'll be the first to say, as I've said publicly before, that our immigration system is in need of modernization. And one of the things that this crisis has done is presented us with an opportunity to accelerate that process. And so what we have done from the beginning of the pandemic until today, and what we are continuing to do going forward, is evolving. We're adapting. We are finding ways to add the resources where we need them, but we're also transforming the way that we do our business. And that means taking some of these processes, which have been traditionally paper-based, and making them virtual and digital. And I'll give you a couple of examples, which I think you as a practitioner will be able to relate to. But in simple terms, Maya, the citizenship application process is one that prior to COVID-19 was all paper-based. Like, you could not apply online. I mean, it was reviewed hard copy, and if there was anything missing, you know, the department would mail it back. You know the process. We are now moving that entire line of business online. We are doing citizenship ceremonies. We used to do them all in person. We're doing them online. In fact, I did my first virtual coast to coast to coast citizenship ceremony on July 1st. And it was a really, it was quite something. I mean, it's one of the most special functions I get to exercise as minister, is welcoming people to the family of Canadian citizenship. But in addition to that, we're also going to move our citizenship testing online. And that's something that I hope to be unpacking with more detail in the next few weeks. The other thing that we're doing is we're completing our permanent residency landing process digitally. You know, it used to be pre-COVID again, that some of the final stages prior to getting your PR papers had to be done in person. Now, when you get your papers approved, as long as you've met with us at some point in the process, we're concluding that digitally, which means that we are drastically reducing the amount of time that it takes to get people across the line and landed. That's going to help us make up for the lost time over the first 7 or 8 months of the pandemic. And I think that we can scale up digitization right across our business. My vision is that in the 21st century, we have an immigration that is as digital and as touchless and as efficient as possible. One that is truly competitive and that gets people into the country so that they can hit the ground running, whether they are coming permanently or whether they are coming as visitors or students or for some other purpose. And that is what I am driving as minister.
So those are some great pieces to hear, and I can attest to some of the, you know, the updating and the going electronic to have really been a helpful thing when you're helping clients through this process. That's great news to hear about the citizenship applications transitioning to an electronic format. My next question is a counterpart to the, you know, some of the impediments we've had to bringing workers here during the pandemic. As we noted, under, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau's government, we've seen an increase in the targets we've laid out for permanent residents. Over the last several years, the government laid out specific numbers, which were ambitious numbers, but expectations as to how many permanent residents we would see come to Canada, you know, between 2017 and through into 2020. But even with the travel exemptions we've talked about, we've seen that we've accepted far fewer foreign nationals as permanent residents this year. You know, and I think in turn that's allowed us to see that unfortunate reduction of entry of those highly skilled workers that we rely on to really bolster our labor force. Can you maybe comment on what those targets were and how the impact of the pandemic has shifted those numbers as we stand today?
For sure. And I'll say coming into 2020 in March, because last year, 2019 was an election year, typically we file our plans in November. This is a year in which we filed 2 immigration plans. In March 2020, the plan was that we would welcome 341,000 new permanent residents. It will come as no shock to you, or I think to the Canadian public, that we are not going to hit that target this year. By my current estimate, we will hit roughly half of that target. So somewhere between, you know, 175 and 185,000, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, but that is the general range that we're looking at. People understand why. With travel restrictions, with COVID-19 disruption, the reality is that it has put such a pressure and a pause that we have definitely seen that impact. Now, I think coming out of this year, we have the opportunity to make up for that lost time. And that is what you see laid out in the 2021 plan, which I'm very excited about, which does look to take essentially the losses or the shortfall from 2019, and it amortizes it over a 3-year period. And so that accounts for hoping to welcome 401, 411, and 421,000 new immigrants over the course of the next 3 years. Or in other terms, just a little bit over 1% of our total population, which is what economists and business leaders and labor leaders and frankly, many immigrants and advocates have been calling for us to strive as a benchmark for years. And so don't just take it from me as a representative of the government and the minister who's charged with the portfolio. Listen to our fellow Canadians, people who have studied this issue for a very long time. This is the right trajectory and the right path for us to be charting out. And so I feel as though with those levels and with the ratio that we with the mix of immigration that is contained within that levels plan. So, you know, about 60% economic immigration, about 25% or so family reunification, and the remainder dedicated to refugees and humanitarian and protecting the most vulnerable. This is a responsible plan, but it's also a plan that really does seek to make the most of the opportunity that we have going forward.
And for the Canadian, you know, hearing those numbers and thinking, well, you know, in the era of CERB, in the era of layoffs, how does this impact me? Can you speak to how those new projected targets help or promote Canadian interests?
For sure. And I would say, you know, for a moment, set aside the numbers. Many of the people that are going to be counted towards those numbers are already in Canada. They're the ones who are working in the healthcare sector on a temporary basis, or who are studying to work in the healthcare sector. And, you know, nothing will make the Minister of Health, and frankly, I think many of those amazing people who've been working around the clock feel more relieved to know that there is help on the way, especially with us being in the midst of a second wave, and with there being more pressure on the front lines and in our long-term retirement homes, where in the first wave we saw the damage that COVID-19 done to our retirement homes right across the country, and that is equally true. It pains me to say, but even in my own community here in Eglinton Lawrence. So we need help, we need reinforcements, and there is a significant number of those people who are already here who are contributing. I'll give another example of this. You know, in Quebec, I was able to announce a pilot project that would allow those seeking asylum who didn't have final status yet with a pathway to become permanent residents. Why? Because even though they didn't have their papers, they decided to roll up their sleeves and do the hard work and help take care of those who were elderly and who were sick from COVID-19. I think Canadians get that. They get that if people are here and they are already contributing and they are giving back, that it behooves us to look at ways to accelerate welcoming them as Canadians, because that will make us stronger both today and tomorrow.
Thank you for that answer. I think that's always helpful to hear and provide some context to those types of numbers. Something timely that's occurred in the recent past, leading up to our conversation, is that recent U.S. election results. You know, coming off the heels of that, I think we can start to expect that we may see a change in U.S. immigration policy with the changeover of the administration. Up to now, and for the last several years, we've seen a largely anti-immigrant policy, which has provided useful to Canada's own, targets and initiatives to bring people here. With people in previous years, when the strategies in U.S. immigration were not as closed off as they were during the Trump administration, we saw a lot of Canadians and foreign talent gravitate to the U.S., that so-called brain drain, Silicon Valley. How is Canada poised to play up its own immigration policies in light of what we can expect to see, in terms of opening up within the U.S. borders to foreign nationals?
Well, of course, it's not for me to comment on another country's immigration policies or the election that just passed. But I will say that, encouraging, that the very first call that President-elect Biden made was to Prime Minister Trudeau. And what I think that signals is the uniqueness of the relationship between Canada and the United States, and how important it is, not only to our economy, but to our people-to-people ties. And I'm looking forward to learning more about what the next administration's policies will be with regards to immigration. I think you're right. There have been some public statements made by President-elect Biden, as well as Vice President-elect Harris, around immigration policies, around asylum policies, around around undocumented workers. And so we will be very eager to learn more about what is coming. But in the meantime, I am confident about the immigration plan that we've put forward, the one that I just tabled a week and a half ago. And I do think that we are positioned very well to be a destination of choice, a top destination of choice for people who are looking to build a better life. And I think that again is, you asked earlier, how do we encourage Canadians to keep faith in immigration? I mean, I have my own story as the son of an immigrant family. I talked a little bit about that at the outset, but each and every one of us has a story that we can relate to. We should share those stories. They remind us that at one point in time in in the history of our family, that we all came to Canada. And so I think that will be confidence instilling as we map out a course forward to take those opportunities to attract really the best and the brightest from around the world. And I'm confident we will be able to achieve that.
Jumping off from your previous comments about our travel ban being one of the biggest in our history, I think the parallel thing that we've sort of introduced is that 14-day staunch quarantine rule. And as someone practicing, I can attest to how few the narrow exceptions are to that rule. They relate largely to frontline workers and healthcare, critical infrastructure, with good reason. But with the recent news about the vaccinations and rapid testing capabilities, are we getting any closer to changes to that 14-day quarantine? Is that something that's being discussed or in the works?
Well, I know that there have been a lot of questions raised about the 14-day isolation rule, quarantine rule. What can I tell you? It works. It is one of the most effective bulwarks against the spread of the virus. At the same time, I know that there are those who are encouraging the government to look at different options. And yes, the vaccine is encouraging, but it won't help anybody today. We don't have it yet. And so we do have to go back to the advice that we get from both our Public Health Agency of Canada experts, as well as the local and provincial authorities. And look, you saw tonight that in my hometown in Toronto, Mayor Tory and Dr. Davila announced additional restrictions. They don't want to be announcing those restrictions. We don't relish having to go out every day and to ask Canadians to remain vigilant and to remain faithful to these protocols. But I assure you that it is done with the best of intentions in mind. And that's why the other supports that we put into place as a federal government, and I'll just take a moment to say with great pride that I think 97 or 98 cents of every single dollar that has been put into Canadian pocketbooks throughout the pandemic has come from your federal government. I mean, yes, we're working very closely with all of our provincial partners, including, I'll say proudly, here in Ontario. But the federal government really has stepped up with support through CERB, with the wage subsidy, with the many supports for businesses, whether it's through the business account loan or through the refreshed rent relief program, which is coming out. I want to see all those mom and pop shops that are there around the corner from where I live survive, and I do my part to try and shop local. I mean, it's very important that we all support those local businesses. So look, we will continue to follow the advice of our experts on this, and yes, hope with as much optimism as we can that we get a vaccine that is as effective as we heard yesterday, so that we can start to revisit some of these health protocols.
Thank you.
Very good.
John, I think John has a few comments to add at the end and also take some questions. So I'll just close my questions by saying, as a practitioner in the immigration field, thank you to you and your department for working through all of this ever-changing, quickly changing, unpredictable stuff. We really appreciate, as practitioners in the field, your quick response and development of temporary policies and a lot of the things you've touched on tonight that have really made it easier and more streamlined for people coming into Canada while still being mindful of our health concerns. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya.